Hello, how are you all doing? So, welcome to this, which is my second one in the Contemporary Landscapes Workshops course. It's based on cold wax, using cold wax as a medium with oil paints. And we're going to be doing a seascape very much inspired by the work of Turner's late paintings. Because Turner actually used a lot of beeswax in his later works, so there were very layered pieces, and some of the layers were 3 millimeters deep in beeswax. So it's not a new medium, it's been used for a very long time, but it's quite popular at the minute with abstract painters. It lends itself beautifully to abstract work because you can really explore lots of different techniques and ways of working the paint. It allows you to do things with oil paints that you couldn't do otherwise with just using the paint. So cold wax medium, what is it? It's beeswax. There's some beeswax pellets like you would use on furniture polish, mixed with turpentine. And the turpentine dissolves the wax so that you get a kind of paste like that. And that's what you mix with the oil paints. It does several things. If you mix a little bit of it with some of the paint, it can make the paint more transparent. If you mix a lot of it with the paint, it can make it more matte and opaque. You'll find out as we go along what you can do with it. But it also allows you to work in lots of layers. Normally with oil paints you have to be very careful how you apply it. You apply a very thin layer and gradually build up thicker layers, so on top, because if you go too thick and then add a thin layer on the top, you can get cracking as it dries. Well, it avoids some of those problems, and it means you can do things that you wouldn't normally do. So it's a great thing for experimenting and playing around with. So for this painting, obviously what you'll need is some cold wax medium. I've got two kinds here. I've got the one that's mixed with turpentine, but you can get it mixed with, this one's mixed with Zest-It, so other kinds of solvents. If you're intolerant to turpentine, it gives some people breathing difficulties. So you'll need that, and you will need, oh, I should just say that you can use Annie Sloane's wax. If you've got chalk paints and use wax on it, you can use that because it's a similar thing. Or if you've got a furniture polish that is beeswax mixed with turpentine, obviously it's the same thing. The Annie Sloane wax has a kind of a white tinge to it, so your colours will be a bit grayer. But if you don't want to spend money on it straight away, if you want to have a play around with something else first, well, those are substitutes that you can use to try and play around with. So you'll need the wax, you'll need a little bit of turpentine or your solvent, and you'll obviously need oil paints, but you don't need many colours. I always only ever use a handful of colours on the palette. What I'm going to be using here is white, quite a lot of white, two blues. So I've got, this is Prussian blue and this is indigo blue. So Prussian blue is a lovely greeny blue, and indigo is much richer, darker, more on the red side of the colour wheel. And I've got Indian yellow or tartrazine here, which is a gorgeous goldeny yellow, and some vermilion. Probably won't be using very much of that, probably put too much on. but you always need a blue, a yellow and a red. No matter what you're painting, you need to have at least those 3 colours. And these colours are actually the colours that that Turner would have used himself. They are Turner colours. So that's the wax, the paints, and then things to apply the paint. Brushes, but go for your older brushes because the beeswax can clog it up a little bit. I'll explain at the end how to clean up your brushes at the end, but it can, you know, it can get into the bristles and spoil the ends of your brushes. Palette knives are very, very useful for this, but if you haven't got palette knives, then use old credit cards. This is one of those things that fastens plastic bags together that broke this morning, so you can use that as a scraping tool. Cotton buds, not the plastic kind, this is bamboo. And we might chuck in some other things as we go along, but they won't be necessary things. Those are the necessary things. I've got a roller here for some of the techniques you'll find out later on. Okay, so the support. You can actually use all sorts of things to paint on with this. I'm using a canvas, a linen canvas, but you could use a board that's been primed with gesso. You could use paper, a good thick paper, if you prime that with gesso, or an acrylic primer, or even emulsion paint at a pinch. Just anything to take the surface of the paint. Canvas, we'll be doing lots of stretching and scraping on the canvas, so I've actually put a bit of a board behind mine just to help it take some of that scratching and scraping. If you're using a cheap canvas, one of those Poundland ones, you'll definitely need to put something behind it because they're so thin that your palette knife will go straight through. Right, so that's what we need, and I'm actually going to show you the first step now because I want it to dry before I go on to the other steps. So again, this is a Turner technique, and this here, oh, hello Henry. This here is not oil paints, it's acrylic paints. So you can do this step with oils or acrylics. I'm using acrylics because it'll dry quickly. So I'm just going to go over the whole canvas. You'll notice that this it's very orange, and I'm doing the Seascape. It's always a good idea to use a kind of opposite colour. This is burnt sienna, so it's an earthy colour. Again, it's a colour that Turner would have used, especially on the underpainting. He was quite frugal, so he used cheap pigments on his underpaintings. So it's a burnt sienna, and it's the colour opposite of the general colour that the Seascape will be, which will be that Prussian blue, a very, very bluey green, a very sea sort of colour. So it's the colour opposite, which really helps those colours on the top to really sing out. That was Henry drinking his water, by the way. I love that noise. Right, so I've covered the whole thing in the acrylic, and I'm now just going to wipe away the lighter bits. So there isn't going to, it's going to be a very simple Seascape, not much detail in it. This is going to be my horizon line. You might think with something that's semi-abstract it's not important to stick to rules of composition, but it's actually more important when you're doing something abstract to make sure that it's got some kind of structure and form to help lead the eye in. So here's a horizon line. and that is going to be golden section rules, so 1 to 1.6. I'm guessing it, but I'm quite good at guessing where that line is. So that's where the horizon is, and then the sun is going to be coming up around about here. Again, that's sort of a third in, or 1 to 1.6. So the sun's going to be around about there. And then there are going to, so there's going to be sun reflected in the sea there. I'm actually looking over here at a photograph that I took of a sunset a few years ago, and then I'm going to put in some with a brush, with a slightly smaller brush, but not too much smaller. So these bits should be darker. Got too much water on the thing there. Right, so these bits around the edges here will be a bit darker, because this is where there are some hills and mountains. So simple as that. That's my underpainting, and most of this orangey colour will be covered over with all the different layers, but I just want to let that dry now before I go on to the next stage, which is how to apply all those lovely waxy oil paint layers. So I'll see you in a bit. Bye.